Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and we've been talking about the book of Esther for a couple of days. It's a crazy, high-stakes drama set in the king's court in Persia in a bygone era. It's a political thriller that maybe is only going to make the most sense if you understand some of the mechanisms of the Persian structure of government and court life. But on the other hand, this story is timeless. You read through it and you can see why this has appealed to generations of people and why it's been handed down from one generation to the next and why now it's such a privilege for you and I to receive it and work through it together and see if we can glean some of the awesome stuff from it that our ancestors have gleaned from it, regardless of what tradition or background they were coming from and regardless of what tradition or background you and I are coming from. So yesterday, we were starting the conversation about how we come at this book. To what degree should we treat it as a story that's timeless, and the setting and the king and all that stuff, it doesn't matter. None of that matters. It's all interchangeable. This could be placed anywhere. The real juice of the story is all contained within the story itself. To what extent should we come at it that way? Or to what extent should we come at it as something that is set in a particular place and time in the biblical narrative, in a particular place and time in the grand history of planet Earth? If it is better interpreted in light of where it fits in the Bible and in history, then we probably need to take a little bit of time to go and look into those things, which I think would be really, really fun, and it may slightly influence my decision. But let me just read to you the opening lines here and think about it, because you're good at interpreting things. You practice that all the time. It's your super hidden secret superpower. Let me just read this to you, and you tell me if this sounds like a story that could be set in any time, in any place, or if the location and the setting matters. Esther 1:1. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, and in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. We might see this differently, but to me, there's so much detail in there that tells me that whoever wrote this thing in the first place thought that it mattered where it was set. Now let's contrast that with hypothetically what cues we get from a story where it doesn't matter where and when it is set. Something like, there once was a gleaming castle in a kingdom far away, and in that castle lived a great and noble king with his wise and beautiful wife, the queen, and their precocious daughter, the princess, who was the object of adoration of many suitors from many kingdoms far and wide. One day, while the king was in a meeting with his advisors, a messenger rushed into the great hall. Now, see, there, all the cues in that ridiculous hypothetical made-up story I just came up with say, it doesn't matter where this is. It can be France, if you would like. It can be England. It could be Italy. It could be the ancient Near East. It doesn't matter exactly when this happened. Anytime there are kings and queens and princesses would work. Everything about that little story I just made up signals to you, the reader, that you should not think of this in a historical sense at all. But I say again, that's not the vibe that I'm getting from Esther here. This opening passage, as well as what I see through the rest of the book, demonstrates an assumption on the part of the original author that the audience he's writing to knows stuff about Persia and is going to understand this story better because of what they know about Persia. I mean, how many specific details do we get right here in the opening lines? Xerxes was the king of Persia in the relatively early going of the Persian Empire. He reigned from 486 to 465 BC, and he was the third very significant monarch in this dynasty of kings who ruled the Persian Empire. Time was measured by the reigns of kings back then, and so the specific mention of Xerxes tells us that we're dealing in a specific time. Further, if this book was written after 425 BC, there would be some ambiguity here because there was another Xerxes who took the throne 2 generations later. And so you would need to specify, if you were writing after that second Xerxes came along, which Xerxes you were talking about. And it looks like the author does that. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. Ah, okay. So this is in the era of that real high watermark. This is the big, powerful Xerxes who did really well, not the not so impressive Xerxes II, who just reigned for like a year and change and did not see dominance over the whole world in quite the same way that his grandfather Xerxes I would have. Okay, and then we get more specific historical details after that. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, and in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet. Well, that 3rd year of his reign clue tells us again that it can't be Xerxes II. He didn't have 3 years in his reign. And also, this little detail that we're talking about Xerxes' palace in Susa gives us some more context about what era of Xerxes' reign we're talking about. It's in the 3rd year of his reign, and this is in the time when he operated out of Susa. Now, assuming we're going to dive into the Persian history here, and that seems to be the way things are trending, we're going to get into how the Persians had multiple capitals, and Susa was just one of them. So this detail that these things are happening in Susa is a pretty specific thing that the original audience would have caught, because Xerxes didn't usually work out of Susa. And then we also get the detail that the military leaders of Persia and Media were there, and that would remind the original audience of the early Persian Empire as well, when the Medes and the Persians were still sort of working together, back when we called it the Medo-Persian Empire. Over time, the Medo side of things, the Medes, got phased out, and it became very exclusively Persian. But all of these things give us a sense of a place and a time. And what that tells me is that if we want to follow the dance steps of the author of this book and what they thought about stuff and how the original audience would have thought about stuff, then we are going to need to bring ourselves up to speed on both the biblical history, so we know where Esther fits in the grand redemptive story of the Bible, and we're also going to need to do the hard and I think very, very fun work of bringing ourselves up to speed on what Persia is, how she became great, how we know anything about her at all, what we know about her great kings, and what we know specifically about what was going on in this moment, and what well-known cultural or political pressures that would have been very well known by the original audience might have been lurking in the background, informing the behavior of the characters in this story. And maybe at this point in our conversation, you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, Buster. You knew all along that this story was set in a historical setting and that you were going to take us through the history of the Bible stuff behind it and the extra biblical grand world history stuff behind it. You knew. So why do we go through this whole exercise of deciding whether we'd treat it as a story that could be set anywhere or something that is planted firmly in history? And the answer is, well, because we're doing it together. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I did decide that well in advance, but I wanted to game it out with you so that in the coming days or maybe even weeks, as we do dig deep into the background of all of this stuff, biblically and historically, we would be on the same page as to why that is a worthwhile exercise. And I'm super excited about it because that means that a byproduct of studying this amazing individual story of Esther is going to be that we also get to study this amazing historical story of Persia, which is just great and also juicy and salacious. And Esther complements it and it complements Esther, and we're going to have a blast. More on all of this stuff tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.